Okay, welcome everyone to the Thursday, October 23rd Carpenter Working Group meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and I think we can go ahead and get started. So I will go ahead and share screen. Okay, so working log for today. Got a few RFCs. I was just giving a blurb about this before I started recording. There is a DRA RFC up that I was going to raise this week as well. Regarding basically integrating DRA configuration into node overlay. I think tentatively we're planning on tabling that. It's still open, so if you want to go take a look and give feedback, it's definitely more than welcome. But I think based on the feedback that's already been provided in some offline discussion, we want to wait until more drivers are available to really determine what subset of functionality we need to be supporting in the API itself. So the plan is still to go forward with DRA integration, just primarily focusing on scheduler integration and then the extension and integration point for different cloud providers so that they can provide their own resource slice definitions for well-known drivers. We'll probably come back to the node overlay integration, but yeah, that's about it for that one. So, okay. Um, Unless anyone happens to have any questions on that, we can probably go ahead and move to the first RFC in the list. So granular resource limits and node autoscalers. I don't know who added this, but if they are here, they can take it away.
I added it, but I think Derek may have added it 2 weeks ago. I wasn't here, so I don't know if there was discussion on this at all. Does anyone remember?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, we had talked about it. I don't think that there was a lot of input from the community when we talked about it, but I have talked with Ellis offline about it as well. I just mostly brought it up as like people should look into this if because it will people are talking about having it apply to Carpenter as well. So we should maybe talk about it.
I think that like one major oh no, okay, there were a couple comments. One was okay, I don't the justification around using scope selector didn't make sense to me. Like scope selector is a thing because resource quota has a concept of like custom selectors, which is like you can select on priority class or you can select I didn't look at all, the whole thing, but like something like that. So it's not just labels. So to me it's like okay, I think maybe we should just call it selector because I don't really know if we're going to be able to select on anything other than labels. And then the other major one was just like how this kind of impacts us generally. Like, how do we think about this with static capacity, for instance, where we like punted on the limits discussion, but now you could arbitrarily select any node pool. Like, if we were to implement this today, like we would I don't know how we would deal with that.
I could see there being a use case for both types of limits. So it depends on how I hate having the idea. I hate the idea of having two limit fields, one on the node pool for like static capacity and one in this auto scaling resource quota. But I could easily also see there being a use case for like a system admin where they're saying, I want to be able to say no team gets more than X CPUs, and then the team itself is like, I want to have multiple node pools, each with their own application limits. So like this, I want to have only so many static capacity ones versus dynamic. So I could see the use case for limiting both. I just don't know what happens when you say that. I think you just pick whichever one's smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of the way I was reasoning about it is I think this kind of serves the use case of global or at least non-node pool specific limits, which is definitely something that we know there's a use case for. There's been requests for it. Um, and I do think this does an okay job serving that. I do agree. I'm forgetting there was one specific part that I know we had thought didn't necessarily make sense for Carpenter. I think it was the minimum on the
Yeah,
limits, right?
which they cut.
Which, okay, they did cut. I didn't
Yeah.
see it in here this time.
Yeah.
So that was the one part that I know I was a little bit iffy on from a semantic standpoint, if it really makes sense for Carpenter.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I think with any of these APIs, which are just super, super flexible, there's going to be room for customers to make missteps in configuration, make things hard to reason about. Especially when you have a bunch of layered limits that all overlap on different instance types.
Yeah, it kind of gets into like topology spread territory where it's like, okay, here's like some actual use cases, but there's like crap ton of flexibility.
Yeah, no, I viewed it kind of the same thing as that, where, yeah, with TSC, you have flexibility to do some wild things, but there's really only a few subsets of use cases that people actually use.
Yeah.
I would wonder if we could approach this by saying like Karpenter, when we support this API, we will only support certain well-known labels that are like specific to the way that Karpenter functions. Like I think we can the OS family, I think there's an obvious use case for because of Windows licensing. I think like limiting I don't know if we should limit specific machine families or like instance families. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I get the concept of nodes and stuff, but I don't know if folks are on the same page about like we should be strict about which ones we support because there's some ones where it gets weird, I think.
Unless I feel like unless there's like a technical hurdle where it would be like way complicated for us to do it, I don't, you know,
It's
I
kind
don't
of
know. I mean, it's probably the same regardless of what we're limiting, right?
that's kind of where I'm at is, yeah, I feel like a strong there isn't a strong reason from a technical perspective to limit it. It'd be more so just trying to prevent accidental misconfigurations. That being said, though, I think it would still be pretty clear if you did like a match labels on instance family. It would be pretty clear semantically what that means, and I don't think it's hard to reason about, even if there's probably not a good reason to do it.
How do we event today if you can't launch a pod due to limit? Or I guess we'd have error logs that would specifically say that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there is an event against the node pool. I could be mistaken though.
There's some level of observability, I think.
Yeah, it's in logs. I can't recall if there's any events, but logs definitely say that we've hit limits. And I think the limit mechanism would be the exact same. The one thing that I am wondering, now I'll have to go through and leave some comments on this. Is there any appetite from the CAS side for a combination of soft and hard limits? I don't know if CAS really has a concept of soft limits.
I didn't hear any conversations about that. It seemed mostly like it was hard limits. I don't know if soft limits make sense for them.
I don't think they do for CAS. I'm not like deeply familiar with it though. Because I know that's one of the things, I mean, we talked about it last working group. I just left a review on the PR for the RFC today, but introducing hard limits for nodes, and we've talked about how that could generally expand to hard limits for any resource. And so I think for Carpenter, there's a pretty clear use case for both soft and hard limits.
Yeah, I don't know if we would want to put our soft limits in this API though.
Well, today in Carpenter, our only limits are soft limits, with the exemption of nodes for static capacity. So that's the one place where this is. Like if we just implemented this with Carpenter's limits mechanism today, now you do have two semantic differences, like two different semantic meanings for limits between Cass and Carpenter, which are sharing a resource, which is a little weird. I don't know if and the other thing that I don't know is is there the anticipation that we would somehow be able to coordinate these limits in clusters running both? Because that would be a
Oh.
pretty massive scope creep in terms of complexity.
I mean, from a user perspective, that would make sense. I want to set this auto scaling resource quota, and then why wouldn't they both obey it? So now Carpenter has to watch it, manage. I guess the same question happens for like, what if you have MNG and Carpenter in the same cluster, which you frequently do? Do you count the MNG nodes? I assume so.
Well, for us, our limits are just based on node pools. So they're not part of a node pool, they're not part of our limits.
Yeah,
To
that's
me,
a great
it's a
question.
good call out in the doc. I feel like I mean, we're just gonna come out and say like it's not gonna be something we're gonna do, but
No, because then you need some shared coordination for actually doing launches to make sure you don't usurp each other.
I think it's interesting to call it out though. Like if
Yeah.
minimally we put a doc on it, or doc on it, we put like a note on it in the documentation. Yeah.
I I don't think there's a strong use case for it for the most part. I don't think there's a strong use case for running Cass and Carpenter in the same cluster, at least long term. Maybe you're migrating from one to the other. Um, but that's about it.
I guess how does
Yeah.
this work in the migration case is maybe an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, presumably if you're migrating, you've paused scaling for one of them.
Well,
But
you probably are like doing a workload by workload migration or node pool by node pool migration. So
that's true.
you, it's gonna, it's a good question. I think it's gonna be pretty tough.
Yeah, no, I can imagine some ways to do it, but
I
none
mean,
of
you could
which
just
are.
if we're going to do this up front, we could modify the autoscaling resource quota to specifically say in the spec which autoscaler it applies to, and then just say they're autoscaler like scoped resources and they're not global. And then someone's going to come along and be like, okay, well, now give me a global API.
Guys, this is easy. You just create a global lock resource and
There you go.
then, yeah, and then you just solve the problem. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what you need. But oh no, it's worth calling out. I don't think it's necessarily something that'll block this proposal, though.
We make the autoscaling resource quota modifier lease object that they both race to get, and then whoever has the lease can be adding nodes.
That's the follow-up. Yeah.
um, I was going through the user stories that they added, and I do wonder if the stories they give for uh, story 3 and story 4 that they give for limiting machine values or zones, I don't know if those actually make semantic sense or make sense in Carpenter. Like avoiding excessive costs just by limiting CPU, sure. But story 3 is like, they're like, oh, this instance type is inefficient cost wise, so I don't want to use it. And I would think that that would be Carpenter would handle that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think just because I don't think every user story necessarily needs to make sense for both.
Sure.
Because yeah, no, anything with cost optimization, I agree. If you wanted to do something similar in Carpenter, you would just do limits on your node pools.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing for story 4, but with IPs and zones. Like Carpenter should manage your IPs for you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's worth when we do the Carpenter implementation, I do think it's worth just considering if we do want to do allow listing labels because some of them might not make sense. Like it's not a technical hurdle. I think it's entirely like a configuration surface issue, but I still think it's worth.
Yeah, I think the main thing though is then if we did want to only support, and I do want to time limit this because we have quite a few other things to discuss. So maybe give 3, 4 more minutes on this, unless anyone disagrees.
No, I think we can move on.
But yeah, the only thing with that though is observability might be a little bit tough. Maybe we're putting like a status condition saying Carpenter's ignoring this. Yeah, things to think about. I would lean towards we probably don't need to invalidate uh, these different auto scaling limits just because we don't think it necessarily makes sense. Simply because it makes it harder not to, and I think it makes it harder for the feature to reason about the feature if we do. But I could be convinced otherwise. Anything else we want to discuss on this? Move on to the next topic. Do we know kind of timelines that SIG Autoscaling is looking at to get this merged, accepted?
I imagine it's close. Like Kuba brought it up this morning. Derek was there as well. It sounds like they're just at a point where they're like, I think a lot of the comments are getting resolved. We're happy with the API. So
Yeah, I think the main thing I was a little antsy on sounds like got pulled out. So okay. Let's go ahead and move on to AMI selector term requirements.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, this is my first time joining one of these meetings, but I wanted to include, yeah, this AMI selector requirements RFC in the discussion today. I opened up this pull request. I think it was in August, and well, I guess maybe to quickly set the stage on like why I opened up this pull request in this design document. Um, So at the company I work at, we were using um, AMI selector terms, the alias for like latest in production, despite all the warnings that Carpenter maybe has in their documentation. And we ran into an incident where a new AMI was released, and due to some well, one of the workloads we were running on our nodes, one of the daemon sets didn't really play nicely with the new AMI release, and then um, nodes started crashing. So um, we were looking at ways that we can maybe like migrate off of using at latest, and we were thinking we'd like to use SSM parameters for that. And what we noticed is when using SM parameters or just using like an AMI ID, there isn't currently a way to pass in like the requirements of the AMI to Carpenter um, when it's making its scheduling decisions that are like associated with the AMI. So the proposal in this pull request is to add in a new field, new property to the AMI selector terms of the EC2 node class CRD to provide just that, to provide requirements. Um, Jason, I know you've provided a lot of feedback. I think I've addressed most of it at this point. I guess like maybe a question to you would be, is there anything else like outstanding for this RFC? Is it just like that I need to really that like the group needs to discuss it at this point, or um would the group be open to like maybe me opening up a pull request for this?
I think I need to, yeah, sorry that this kind of dropped off my radar. I'll have to take another look to see if there was anything outstanding for me. Yeah, sorry, I see you pinged me a couple of times and I just didn't see the notification. Um, from what I recall, though, I thought it was in a relatively good state. I think it was more so it just needed group consensus that this is something we thought was reasonable to go forward with. I am curious, real quick, though, kind of not on the topic of this RFC specifically, but on Alias. If your issue was automatic upgrades, is there any reason you wanted to go the SSM route versus using the pinned alias versions? Like instead of saying alias at latest, alias at like V1.2?
Right, yeah. So it's more from like it's like an internal platform decision where we don't want to have to like request all of the clients of our platform to then update an alias version when a new one is released. We'd rather just like have that centrally managed. And that can be done with things, right? Like through Argo CD or some GitOps based tool. But for folks who maybe aren't using Argo CD, providing an SSM parameter for them would be nice.
Got it. Yeah, I guess I am curious then if you're not, like as a platform, not necessarily in full control of the applications. Generally, like our guidance on upgrading AMIs and the reason we don't recommend using latest is it is going to be very workload by workload dependent if an AMI introduces some form of incompatibility, like potentially there was some dependency on a specific quirk in a driver version, etc. So that's generally why we've recommended against at latest and having like a per environment validation process. I'm curious, do you still fall more in line with that use case of we know our workloads, we run in a pre-prod environment, validate the AMI there, then roll out this new SSM parameter?
Well, yeah, exactly. Maybe we would have multiple like versions of this SSM parameter, one for non-production, one for production, and be able to validate in a non-prod region as
Okay,
we're
and then,
rolling out. Yeah.
yeah, the expectation would be like teams alert you if the pre-prod one suddenly started breaking their workloads in pre-prod.
Right. Either Teams alert us or the monitoring we have set up would
Okay.
yeah, catch it.
I guess, has anyone else had a chance to read this? I know I had raised it, I think back in August. I had raised it in working group. Um, and I think it's probably, I don't know if we'll be able to come to an answer then in this meeting. I don't think there's anything outstanding for you to do right now. I mean, thanks for raising it again. I think we can get a few more people to review it offline and based on that, see where to go from there. I mean, does anyone have any initial thoughts on on the concept of being able to provide requirements for a specific AMI?
I think that makes sense. I don't see any issue with that.
Yeah. And this is, for what it's worth, something I originally wanted to scope in when I was implementing Alias, was to make it so that you could do these per AMI requirements. We just didn't have a strong motivating use case at the time. So yeah, my personal thoughts are it's reasonable, but my vote is not the only one that matters. But okay. Yeah, I think I'll take another review pass, try and get consensus within the next week to see if this is something we want to go forward with and let you know. And then, yeah, if we have that consensus, I think the next step would be a implementation PR.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. No problem. All right, consolidation performance testing metrics. Take it, Derek, you raised this.
Yes, I raised this. I made this issue today more as a FYI than a request. I'm going to be working on most of you already know, but we have this problem where people bring up stuff like cluster utilization threshold for saying like a cost threshold for saying consolidation decisions aren't worth making after a certain point, or like utilization threshold. People seem to have this node pod churn problem where Karpenter is churning nodes in their mind unnecessarily. And a lot of the problems we come down to is we don't have good data on either accepting or rejecting specific cases. So the bulk of the work here is going to be basically trying to get some metrics out that let folks understand what decisions Karpenter is making poorly so we can better root cause what's going on and find a good solution that doesn't a good solution that fixes the problem. And then on the other hand, we need better regression testing for performance to make sure that whatever change we do make doesn't break existing things. So it's two things, but I think this is kind of the answer we've been coming up with as a team about how do we accept these like consolidation improvement PRs is we need good data. So
I want to add something. It's partially related, but it's not completely related. Specifically around like one of the problems we've been fighting is that we have no information about Karpenter's internal simulation, about nodes. And we've seen that we lost efficiency because there's some mismatch in what we thought Carpenter thinks and what it's actually thinking for nodes, sorry. And it will be good. I guess it's partially related in that like it'll be good to understand when Carpenter decides to not choose a node or decide not to consolidate or decide to consolidate, like what internally its simulation of like that node type or that instance type, what resources it thinks it has and how many can pack in there or not pack in there. I don't know how to expose that, but because that simulation is complete black box to everyone, it's very hard to understand or like figure out like, hey, why didn't it make certain decisions? And there's no way to extract out what it thought is available from that node with unless you look at the code. And some sort of metric or some way to expose that information would be helpful. I just don't know how, but yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we've been thinking about because I mean it's also we have access to the same information you do for trying to debug like why was something consolidated, why wasn't something consolidated. The issue we've definitely ran into when thinking about this in the past is simply the volume of information. Um,
Yeah.
it's there's definitely a lot of it. I mean, I've been thinking more and more, especially I've been doing a lot more reading of like the upstream kube scheduler code to try and work out how we're doing the DRA integration. And I noticed they do have far more granular logs than we do that I expect you are not generally running in production because no one wants to pay for terabytes upon terabytes of scheduler logs. But I am thinking that it does maybe make sense for us to start adding that increased verbosity of logging, even if the expectation isn't for that to be ran in production or even in debug mode, having that like V4, V5, like lower level logging just available for trying to root cause replicatable issues is going to be valuable.
I do know that there's a tracing issue floating around the Carpenter issues. I
Yeah.
think might be the fix there because that's like I, it's the same problem but backwards. You're like trying to debug a specific problem with like a given cluster,
Yeah.
and I do know we need better observability on that in general.
Mhm.
Jonathan, go first before I'll add something.
I said I have good news. I've been working on this. I was hoping to raise a tracing PR. I don't know if it would be accepted, like if everyone would agree with it, but I think minimally like we could enable the tracing feature flag and then like feature flag it in, and then if it causes problems, we can just drop it. Um, I also like tracing has sampling characteristics, so you could theoretically you could just sample and prod if you wanted, and you may not catch every occurrence of the issue, but if the issue is like common enough, then it may pop up within your sampled set. And potentially, I don't know, like I think we'll have to see on our side, like if we enabled this in production, like how it would perform. If it was just like every reconcile loop had tracing. But I've seen it more and more, like as I've looked at more controller reconciliation like implementations, there's quite a bit more of like this kind of tracing within the reconcile loop because it's kind of a request in a way. So it kind of makes sense similar to like an HTTP request that you would like log different parts of it.
I guess my worry is that when it's deciding consolidation, for example, it looks at a node. Like you need to be able to trace, not necessarily like it's not actually a request. It's like, should I do something with that node? And then you'll be able to trace that and see where I guess exit
Yeah,
or your
this is
things.
yeah, this is where sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I guess this is kind of where I'm like, I don't know what the limits on this are. Like I suspect like people use tracing in prod when they're getting like high throughput on like HTTP servers. So I don't know how granular we can get without it being a problem, but I would like what I would like is that you could like every function call into the scheduler, like you had all this information. So you could basically like stack trace it all the way down. How much data that would be, that's a question. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
though I imagine with tracing, is it similar to like metrics where you actually have to scrape the trace data, or is
It's
it
a
logged out to a file?
OTel is push based, so you
You can
have to
push the
basically
file.
opt into it and then have an endpoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
can
it's
push the
still
file too. Yeah.
Yeah, you
yeah,
can do
it's
that. But yeah.
still opt-in though, so it's not like if we shipped some form of OTel tracing, everyone's ephemeral storage usage with Karpenter would just explode.
It,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
I I guess the other point I was gonna add is we have some of the information. I think I guess part of the information that's helpful that possibly we can have is some way to maybe ask Carpenter, hey, can you show me your offerings cache? Because in theory, there has information within the offering cache of like instance types and stuff like that. Like maybe it's an endpoint that we can hit and it dumps it. That way we don't bulk everything out with all the data, but we can extract out what it thinks the world looks like for all the instance types and pricing and all that. That way, maybe we're able to trace like, oh, at this point in time, this is what it thought the world looks like and the cost looked like. And maybe that's why it didn't decide to make certain decisions. I don't know, but I guess it would be good to have some visibility into its decision making based on like all the data it has Carpenter access to, but I think it might be too big to dump as a metric. But if it's an endpoint that we can call periodically to get a state of the world of, then we can control how much data is coming out and have some sort of like, oh, I think at this point in time, it thought the world looks like this, and that's why maybe it won't choose a certain instance type.
Yeah, I could see something like that being useful. I do wonder if it if you couldn't get that out of I don't know if I agree with the like endpoint approach, but I understand that like Carpenter has these like internal memory representations
Mhm.
that are critical to its like decision making, and they're very opaque because
Right.
we don't do a good enough job logging when they change, and there's
Mm.
no way to crack them open that isn't like attaching a debugger and prying open the memory. And so I do think that there's room there. I don't know if Jonathan, you were planning on tackling that with tracing, but I think it's more of a request basis for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I do we not already have this? Maybe I missed the end of this, but like don't we have metrics already on all this internal data for
Well, not enough. I the issue. So yeah, like on pricing, for example, pricing specifically, we do have metrics on. You
Right.
should be able to get like by instance type and by zone, this is the current price, but we don't necessarily have the capacity. We
Yeah.
don't have for like ODCR the current in-memory view of the available node count. Um,
we have
I could
availability,
see.
which
Hmm?
is like I said, but we have availability, which gets you decent.
Yeah, just true or false.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just giving examples of the information that is in memory that isn't in metrics.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see it useful even from a development standpoint if I could just say like hit an endpoint, give me a JSON representation of all of cluster state. Um, like I could definitely see the use. I agree. I'm not sure what the right approach
Yeah, I
to
don't, yeah.
that data out is. I
Yeah.
don't think metrics is it because the cardinality is way too high.
Yeah, yeah. That's the only reason I say endpoints because I don't know all the way unless you dump it on logs, but it's not great either. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's where a based approach is nice. I don't know I don't know what better options other than something like just having an HTTP endpoint that you hit.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Because yeah, sometimes it would be nice to just be able to give me the JSON struct. I don't know, it's something definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah, I feel like this is an area where we've tried to be perfect, and I get the feeling as we like sit on this longer and longer that it's just worthwhile trying things and like feature flagging them, and people will tell us what they like or don't like, and we can kind of drop things as needed, or we find out that what works for us, and then we, by running things in production and we find out what's
Yeah.
useful, basically.
The only main danger that I would see is if because generally the one place I don't want to experiment is with stuff that we think will either blow up cluster cost or really
Yeah.
kill performance.
Yeah.
The worst case is someone just continuously pulls this endpoint and we have to grab a mutex each time we read the data. Yeah, you're going to kill performance there, but I think we can just provide guidance of, hey, don't hit this every 10 milliseconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth consideration. I don't know. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? It would be good to get I mean, if you're interested in this, it'd be good to get an issue with like the types of information
Yeah.
we're interested in being able to get like point in time values for.
I'll see if I can throw something up. I've been not able to do any Carpenter related things for a while, so we'll see.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good. Any other discussion on this one? I think we had a couple of points in community questions. So,
I think with adding Derek as a reviewer first, right?
oh, yes. Derek, reviewer, anyone have any objections? I
Speak
think
now, or I
everyone
will be commenting
commented
on your
on the
PRs.
I mean, Jonathan and I both approved. Garvin approved.
It's not going to happen live because the pre-submit failed. Dang it.
That
No.
thing
Oh,
always fails.
yeah, no, we really need to figure out why it
Did it
keeps
say
failing.
27 minutes? Holy cow.
Wait, did it?
It
Oh,
just
yeah.
hung. It must have hung or something.
I actually thought it short-circuited at 10, so I'm a little surprised.
Yeah.
All right, we'll rerun that. I think we have consensus. And this has been up for a couple of weeks. I saw some comments from some of the Azure folks as well. So, all right, cool. Welcome to the reviewer team, Derek.
Glad to
Okay.
be here. Long time listener, first time caller.
What is it? Remove hold. If my M key would work. If that doesn't work, I'll figure it out after. Worst case, I'll just hit squash and merge. Okay. Yeah, Garvin, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, I guess we partially talked about the second one already, but on the first one, I've been trying to figure out this where around savings plans, the problem there is that the current, I guess, implementation with overlay, it doesn't have the idea of, say, how much capacity you have left in the saving plan. So the price adjustment needs to be readjusted as you get over or close to or over the saving plan, how much you have. So my thought there is either maybe it makes sense for overlay to have some sort of, I'm not sure if it formally makes sense, but like in this case, maybe it makes sense to have some sort of capacity within the overlay such that the price adjustment happens for the first 10 nodes, and then after that, it auto knows that, the capacity is out and then adjustment goes down and gets removed. And that might make sense for, saving plan, but in addition to that, maybe more generically, like licenses or stuff like that, where maybe after a certain point, pricing jumps dramatically and you can't do it anymore. I don't know the answer. The alternative I was thinking is that this is very similar in shape as ODCR in that there's a capacity and there's a price adjustment. So maybe the provider, the ODCR support can also be opened up to do saving plan, or both of these can go to no overlay with the capacity. I don't know the answer, but like it feels like there's something here that are similar, but I just don't know the answer of where to go. But there is still a problem of, okay, I have some sort of price adjustment that's gonna change based on how much stuff is being used. And I need some way to teach Carpenter this, and I'm not sure where this goes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the thing we had talked about last time when this was brought up, I can't remember if it was you who brought it up or if it was someone else, was what we thought we needed was a good way to track like global consumption of the saving plan. We
Hmm.
don't expect savings plans to usually be used, like unless you have one account per cluster, like we don't expect savings plans to be single tenant in
Right.
sense. So you need a way, like with ODCRs, we have the described capacity reservation API, and
Yeah.
that tells us how many instances are still available within the ODCR. Last I checked, that doesn't exist for saving plans.
Right. I think we talked about it last time, and I was like, maybe there's an API, but I did not have the time to check that thing where there's like a instance saving plan API from EC2 that has some sort of capacity thing.
Yeah,
But
there is an API that describes the actual savings plan,
right.
but it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't exactly give you the exact amount of capacity that you're either using, just because everything is done, at least for it on the AWS side, all done retroactively. Um, you fulfill it and then it's just calculated into your billing later. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case, but and that's the kind of makes it very difficult, at least with this, just because in some cases, you can have savings plans that are cross-regional, and that's just I don't like that makes it. I think, I mean, anything outside of a cluster makes it pretty hard to track, but that also adds in that level of complexity.
As a, I guess,
Couldn't you,
sorry, go
as
for
long
it.
as they're on the same account, couldn't you just use describe instances to find all of the instances that match a specific thing? Like you'd
Yeah,
have to know what regions to check, because I don't think you want to just call describe instances in every region constantly. But assuming that the customers or the user has configured their Carpenter permissions properly, you should be able to view instances that aren't Carpenter managed.
yeah, but I guess you could have instances launched into a savings plan that aren't managed by Carpenter.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I'm saying. Is you should be able to know all of the instances because you have
Yeah, I mean,
access to the EC2 API. So you can't stop the other guy. Like let's say there's a different Carpenter. You can't stop them from launching instances when you're at the limit. But if you're watching the limit, you can prevent yourself from going over the limit.
yeah, I mean, you could, I mean,
It's
yeah, you'd have the regional, I mean, you'd also have the regional issue, but yeah, inherently, I just see this as being incredibly racy. If you're running multiple carpenters in an account.
sure.
which, I mean, for what it's worth, maybe it's fine if it's a little bit racy.
And
Uh,
if Carpenter's only going off of like its view of the node overlay, it doesn't need to get it right.
Right.
I think that's Jason's point. Like it doesn't,
mhm.
because if you go over your savings plan, it's not like a capacity block where like you get iced. You know what I'm saying? If you go over your savings plan, it just costs you a little more.
Right.
Yeah, but I guess the impact there though is like the decisions that we make. We think one price is one thing versus the other, and I personally would want to explore this idea more exactly how that would impact you. And I mean, depending on the discounts and such and the different scenarios, I do see it. I do like the idea that Garvin did mention of like actually having some value of how many instances that are applied to an overlay or to I guess to the pricing concept. Um,
Like within your node overlay, it would say like,
yeah,
yeah,
Like 10 nodes or whatever. And
right.
I guess you push the responsibility onto the user to attempt to give it the right capacity for a saving plan. And Carpenter just like, I'm not going to try because it's too difficult and you figure it out. And that will get us mostly there anyway, too, just because essentially the problem is like if we want to use spot instances, we have to understand our compute saving plan and then our instance saving plan. And there's no way to do it dynamically right now, except for us have a controller that pulls every whatever to check and then updating all the price adjustment as we go. Versus we just say at this point in time, let's just say 10 nodes is likely capable, and maybe 5 minutes later we'll update that capacity if necessary. And that way, at least for a finite period of time, Carpenter knows a little bit better what the true pricing should look like before it decides to use spot or something else.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that for better or worse, this is the spirit of node overlay. Like, we can't figure out the pricing information, and you kind of have to give us that information.
Mhm.
If not, we would just automatically build it in into the provider. And I think that in these particular cases, I think there are also other use cases that I think reserved instances also have a very similar problem. And for those, I think having the direct like capacity amount actually is very helpful, since you can, I believe from my understanding, you do get like a finite amount of reserved instances. So yeah, I think more generally, I think this is just like the feature that you're describing is just a lot more useful outside of just savings plan. I mean, for savings plans, it only partially solves the problem anyways.
Yeah, I guess the main thing I'm wondering is how much it actually, or how well it actually works for savings plans in practice, given that I would expect, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would expect most of the time you have multiple consumers in an account consuming the same savings plan. So I just don't know how you would arrive at that value that you set on the node overlay.
I think, at least for now, it's just best effort. Like at this point in time, there's this many nodes available, we think, but there's no guarantee that between now and the next poll and updating the capacity that that's still true, and we're okay with that. Like it being maybe around in the right direction, but then not necessarily completely correct, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so are you thinking you'd actually be dynamically updating?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we will still be dynamically updating. The only difference here is that our time to the next update, it could be much longer if we can set a value that we think for the next hour, 100 nodes can get on a saving plan versus right now, whereas every n minutes we have to update the price adjustment just so that in the case that we do run out, we readjust right away, if that makes sense. Or readjust as soon as the next poll happens when we can. But then that may cause issue where like now we're reshuffling all the nodes, and I don't want that to happen either. So like it's a little complicated if that makes sense. But yeah, the ability to provide maybe 100 nodes as a capacity or whatever stabilizes the cluster a little bit more with a certain pricing, and it gives us some time before we have to update again or something stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to ever be able to do much better
Yeah, yeah. I did.
EC2,
Yeah,
unless we
I
get an
think we can do
EC2.
better. I mean, I think you could make a DynamoDB table that stores your precise. No, I'm serious. Like, you could store the amount of instances that are allowed, and then you tell Carpenter what DynamoDB table to look at, and you
right.
have an agreed upon spec that like is created within the Carpenter cloud formation, and then all the various carpenters and all the various clusters try to update the DynamoDB table. Like, what we're talking about is
Yeah,
an account level track of a number. I think that's been
Right.
solved. The
yeah.
hard part is
If we're
getting
willing
Carpenter to
to,
know what like how to do the like this overlay only applies to X nodes. Like, that logic is complicated in
oh
Carpenter, but
no,
arriving at like
that's straightforward. That's what overlay already does.
you can already say like this only applies to 10
Oh, I
nodes.
guess
I thought
you can't say that specifically. I don't think that would be that complicated.
fair enough. And so then you do that part and I'll do the part with the DynamoDB because I don't think that's that complicated and we'll
I don't think it's complicated. I just don't like it.
that's fair.
Um, but, also you have the just the issue of you'll have other non-things than Carpenter that are provisioning capacity. But of course, if you have an agreed upon spec of this is what the DynamoDB table looks like, this is how you have to interact with it, yeah, you could have other provisioning solutions making use of it. So,
Yeah,
oh,
I
no,
guess.
it's worth brainstorming on some more.
Yeah, I guess I was gonna ask Garvin, can you give at least a little bit more context exactly how like the savings, if you can, how like the savings plans is like split up? Are you using like one plan for a cluster for just a whole account? Like how exactly is it? You
It's
know?
super complicated.
Okay.
But essentially, there's a separate team that's like looking at how much capacity we're using. Based on that, we evaluate if we need a compute saving plan, which have like an underlying savings across like general compute that using. And then they would also look at like, oh, are we using certain instance type more? And based on that, we'll do like instance saving plan to cover any like peaks or like general trends that we can cover under the plan. So, and it changes not necessarily day to day, but like every few days they're readjusting automatically on what plans to use and whatnot, based on how much capacity we're trending towards or not, or trending down against. So that number does like the saving plan itself are already dynamic, but the capacity being used within the plan is also dynamic. And then I guess from our side, the hope is that not only can we use some of that information, but better tell Karpenter what spot to use. But in the cases where we are uncovered by any saving plans, we can start shifting a lot of our capacity over to spot or something else, such that we bring it back down to cover and stuff like that. So like there's more high level like manipulation of capacity going on, but at the very simplest problem is I just needed to pick spot only when it's cheaper, approximately cheaper than our savings at this current point in time. But at a higher level, yeah, we're trying to do more things, but
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks.
And it doesn't have to be overlay. It just, my initial thought was like, it kind of fits. It doesn't fully fit. It's somewhere in the similar space, but I don't have an answer if that's the right solution, you know.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about adding this as part of the initial implementation, but then just to avoid the scope creep, that was something that I avoided.
No, that
Yeah,
makes sense, you know.
I think unless we were able to natively support savings plans. So like if we did want to build out something where, yeah, there's this tool that whether it's all the carpenters updating this like global table or some other tool is tracking saving plan consumption, unless we were to support it natively like that, I think node overlay is the appropriate spot to configure that.
Right. I guess that's having some sort of capacity within node overlay makes sense. That wasn't sure, completely sure about. Like it made sense somewhat from a saving plan perspective, but it doesn't fully make sense for resources, or extended resources or adjustment to resources.
Yeah, yeah. I can't think of a use case for extended resources. I mean, that's something that we kind of just fell into, I think, when we've added pricing and extended resource overrides to the same CRD.
Yeah.
That, yeah, there's going to be some functionality you want for one, but not for the other. And I think that's okay.
Okay.
But the thing I'd like to understand more about is if there are other use cases for this capacity type override. um, than just savings plans. Because it is a bit of a weird semantic for the node overlay.
Yeah, I think reserved instances is the other one that I know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know enough about how, honestly, either savings plans or reserved instances work to have a concrete opinion today.
yeah, we definitely do. I mean, Garvin, if you can open up a GitHub issue where we can track this, that'd be
Sure.
great.
Okay. I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything anyone else wants to discuss? We've got 2 minutes left. Alrighty. Well, thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.